Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for another of our McCloskey lectures. And I'd like to begin with about a 90-second announcement. This is a pretty historic day at the Aspen Institute. Last year, as some of you may know, led by our board chair, Margot Pritzker, our board and our management team, including Elliot Gerson, who's here on stage, developed our 5-year enterprise-wide strategic plan. Our 3 priorities were to devote the institution to building social trust, to connect leaders of all types for learning and collaboration, and third, to dramatically expand our offerings for youth and young adults. Towards this third priority, engaging and including rising generations, we articulated a vision. I hope it would be one that the governors would think is a good vision to have, that civil dialogue, civic engagement, and leadership development should be a predictable part of the journey to adulthood for all young Americans. Well, today, in the service of that vision, we announced the inauguration of a Center for Rising Generations at the Aspen Institute, led by the distinguished educator, Kaya Henderson, and to be endowed in perpetuity with a founding gift from the Bezos Family Foundation of $185.7 million. We are so proud, obviously, to have received this investment and so determined to work with any and all partners who want to encourage and equip young people to become the engaged citizens and principled leaders essential to our economy and our democracy and our national security. Today's event, then, is an ideal capstone to a historic day for the Aspen Institute. And we're here today to learn about leadership and public service at the state level from 3 Republican governors: Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi, Governor Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma, and Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire. It was our pleasure to welcome Democratic Governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, a few weeks ago for a similar conversation. Our moderator will introduce the speakers. For a moment, a few quick words of thanks. First, to Tom and Bonnie McCloskey, and Tom is here for your support of this endowed series. Second, to the Aspen Institute staff, especially our colleagues Crystal Logan, Aspen Community Programs, and Jenna Moe from Society of Fellows. Thank you to your teams. And finally, to our moderator, Aspen Institute Executive Vice President Elliot Gerson, who leads our policy programs in our international network of 13 partners and has made numerous remarkable and enduring contributions to the Institute across the past 2 decades. I now hand it over to Elliot. Thank you, Elliot.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan, and it is a historic day. Great thanks to Mike and Jackie Bezos. We're all absolutely thrilled, and all of you will see all kinds of signs of that generosity and spirit here in the days and many years ahead. And I just want to also thank this wonderful audience. As I mentioned to these distinguished governors, we are very privileged to have a deeply civically engaged audience here, always in Aspen, looking for greater understanding of key issues and then working very respectfully and collaboratively to improve their communities, their states, and well beyond. And we are extremely fortunate to welcome 3 of the nation's leading governors today. As you heard from Dan, we're a nonpartisan organization. We welcomed Governor Hochul here earlier this summer, and we will be nonpartisan, but I can tell our guests no need for you to be nonpartisan. So you have their bios, you know a little bit about them, but as always, we stream these events and then they have a long life on YouTube. So let me just tell you a little bit about each before we jump into a conversation and then get to your questions as well. Tate Reeves is the 65th governor of Mississippi, serving in that role since 2020, but before that, for 20 years, high positions in the state government, lieutenant governor, treasurer of the state. He's known for his leadership with respect to educational opportunity as well as employment opportunities, so Mississippi citizens can thrive. Along with their families. With respect to education, he may want to comment on his record educational gains, called by some the Mississippi Miracle. And just a few months ago, he announced a record $12 billion in new private sector investment. He's proud both of his record of tax cuts and the largest teacher pay raise in state history. Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma has also made really a significant national name of himself in education and in economic development. An entrepreneur turned public servant, he founded Gateway, which became one of the state's largest banks. He took office in 2019 and turned his focus initially to revitalizing the healthcare system in the state. He secured tax cuts, invested in education and teacher pay raises. Maybe we have a little theme here. He also oversaw the largest single-day commutation of nonviolent drug offenders in U.S. history while maintaining one of the lowest rates of recidivism in the nation. And then Christopher Sununu is the 82nd governor of New Hampshire, now in his 4th term, receiving, I believe, in 2020, more votes than any candidate had in the state's history. And as you know, and as we hear about frequently these days, New Hampshire is a so-called purple state. He is known for strict financial responsibilities, combining balanced budgets with no new taxes. He's led one of the fastest growing states in the Northeast, has one of the country's lowest unemployment rates and the lowest child poverty rate in the country. And when it comes to a scorecard for political prediction, he's done awfully well, saying long before almost anyone else that I'd read nationally, saying that the Republican Party should prepare for Kamala Harris to be the nominee. I think it was well over a year ago, perhaps the first time he said that, and that she'd pick a governor to be her vice president, noting it would be invigorating for the Democrats and very detrimental, potentially, to the Republicans. My guess is that we will probably get a little bit to this subject of the national campaign. But first, just thinking about introducing you and the success you've each had as governors, I'd like to ask a general question. We've spent a lot of time this summer in this room and others around the Institute talking about the precipitous decline in trust in all kinds of institutions, and especially political institutions. Congress, the trust in Congress is at an all-time low. Trust in the executive branch, trust even in the Supreme Court. But there is an exception, and that's governors. And whether it's a governor who's in a red state or a blue state with a supermajority, or a governor of a purple state of one party or another, or even in some instances of Democratic governors in Republican states and vice versa. So why the exception? What is it that you do and your colleagues that make it, I think, a real exception in the American political system? Any of you, please.
I'll start. Why not? Look, what I would begin with is I don't know if you'll get partisanship from the three of us today, but one thing I can promise you, you're going to get honesty, because the three of us, if you don't want to know what we think, you better not ask us a question, okay? And look, here's the reality, in my opinion. Generally speaking, people in Washington, D.C., regardless of their title, talk about doing stuff. Governors, and particularly Republican governors, actually do stuff. And I think that resonates quite well with the voters. And I think when you look at the trust or total lack thereof of certain political groups and entities, that's the core reason that it exists.
Governor Stitt, what?
Yeah, well, I'll jump in. First off, thanks so much for having us. It's such a great group here. Thank you all for being such engaged people in not only Colorado and Aspen, but also nationally. I think governors have a unique perspective. So whether you're Republican, Democrat, we have a great bipartisan network that we have to, focus on our education system. We all want the same things, the best education for our kids. We're focusing on roads and bridges. We're focusing on our healthcare system. And we're focused on the economy. We don't have the luxury to play politics like Congress does. They're so dysfunctional. But literally, we have to make decisions as the executive and the governor. And I always tell Oklahomans, let Washington, D.C. play politics. Let's just go make our state a top 10 state in everything that we do. And I have 49 other states to compare ourselves to. And so from a business perspective, I always metrics our things, and I always look at our different scorecards, and I'm always pushing my team that we can do better. Same thing we do in the business world. If another company's doing something, I want to do it in our state. So I think that's the way we approach it as governors.
And I would just add, it's all about accountability, right? 24/7, we're on. 50 governors, there's a flood, there's a shooting, there's a whatever. We got to be accountable. The buck stops here. It's a 24/7 job. Not necessarily a good thing. My family, we haven't taken a vacation in like 5 years. That's more of a me problem than anything. I'm going to work on that. But because we have to be so on, and I think that the big change happened, I think a lot of people would appreciate in COVID, right? Washington disappeared in COVID. They passed a couple bills, post-April, did nothing. Didn't pass a single bill to address COVID in any way until after the election, and then they all admitted it was for political reasons. Governors were out there every day taking questions from the press, with their constituents, connecting with folks. Here's what we know. Here's what we're going to do. Republican and blue states and red states might have handled it differently. That's fine, but they had to be accountable to the situation and to the crisis. And I think that's when people realized, wait a minute, Congress and the Senate just kind of go on vacation. I mean, they literally have 26 weeks of vacation. I mean, literally. They can spend a lot of money, they can raise a lot of money, and not get a whole lot done. The bar has been set incredibly low. You ever notice every time they pass something, it's like Congress is going to pass a bill. Yeah, yay, they pat themselves on the back. They haven't balanced a budget in 20 or 30 years. We all have to balance a budget every year. We have to work with our constituencies. Congress could pass a bill that says we want to help mental health, and here's some money for mental health. But I guarantee you no one in Washington can tell you how the doorway to mental health works. If you're in a crisis at 2 a.m., how does your kid get mental health services in your community? Governors have to design those systems, right? So we have to be on the ground with folks to implement success for people, and that's the accountability that they see. And sometimes we're not perfect. It works, it doesn't work, but at least we're accountable. And I think ultimately that's probably why, for the most part, we all get along. We really do. Democrat and Republican governors really get along fairly well with very, very few exceptions, as opposed to the extreme partisanship you see out of Washington.
Maybe I'll ask in a little while how you get along with the governor of Minnesota, but maybe I won't.
Tim's a nice guy. Tim Walz is a very nice guy. Him and Gavin are definitely the most liberal, progressive governors out there, and they own it. I give him credit. He really, up until recently, he owns how progressive and liberal he is. He's kind of changed his tune, but he's a nice...
What changed?
I wonder. But I would say Tim is a very nice person.
Okay. All right. Back to you, Governor Reeves. The reason we're lucky to have you all here is the coincidental meeting of the RGA here. And you're on the executive committee. I wonder, as an RGA leader, if you can tell us a little bit about what's going on at the St. Regis and what you
Don't tell him anything, Tate.
How did I get this question first?
So, what are the most important issues? Not looking for any state secrets here, but what are you all talking about?
Well, what I would tell you is the single most important aspect for me personally with the Republican Governors Association is the opportunity to sit in a room with these two guys and other Republican governors and learn from them and listen to them and learn what their challenges are and have been and how they've gone and addressed them. And look, I came into office in January of 2020. If you go back to 1972, the most federally declared disasters Mississippi's ever had in any one year, to Chris's point earlier, was 4. From 72 to 2019, the most we ever had in one year was 4. In my first 14 months in office, we had 14 natural disasters that required a federal declaration from the president. That included both President Trump and President Biden. What I would tell you is, and by the way, of those 14, only one of those 14 was actually COVID. And so what I would tell you is the thing that really got me and ultimately our state through those very challenging times was the fact that Republican governors got on a phone call once a week, every week, talking about the approaches that we were all taking to the various items that came before us. And I will tell you, we take, not only are we not ashamed of it, we take pride in stealing good ideas from our fellow governors. And so more than anything else, wherever we have RGA meetings, the thing that is so very important to me is just learning from my fellow governors.
Any favorite stolen idea last couple of days you want to share?
You know, I think we just got an executive committee meeting, and the thing that we share and talk about is obviously the economy, inflation that's hurting, crushing the middle class, and really a lot of it is energy policy. Like, so the governors, Republican governors, get together and we will agree that we need an all-of-the-above energy approach. And to tell you kind of how Oklahoma thinks about it, we're number 6 in oil production in the country, number 5 in natural gas production. We're so proud of our oil and gas industry. But we're also, people don't realize this about Oklahoma, we're number 3 in the country in electricity generated by wind. We're one of only 4 states that over 45% of our energy comes from renewables. So we believe that you need an all-of-the-above approach to meet the needs of Americans and to lower the cost of everything. So when we see the Biden-Harris administration putting their thumb on the scale and banning LNG exports, which, by the way, that actually hurts our allies in Japan and Europe. It drives them into the arms of our adversaries more than anything, because there's a news flash here. Every country has to provide a reliable, affordable energy grid. And so I just think we're not having honest conversations. So as Republican governors, we all get together and we push that. Governor Abbott is a leader on border security. And so all of us governors push those policies, and we ask and we say, hey, here's the 10 things that we think we can do that would help with open borders. So, and the other thing that I like people to know, I set up a commission in Oklahoma to study immigration. Like, I think that the states need to control what does a workforce visa look like. So when you go to Mississippi or New Hampshire or Oklahoma and you're in the construction industry or agriculture, or if you want to hire more engineers, you should be able to go to the states and then match the employer with the employee, right? And if there's somebody that wants to come to America, we're all for that. But that doesn't take away the fact that we need to have secure borders as well.
The thing I would add a little bit, I'll take it away from the RGA and I'll go to the NGA. So when the national governors get together, for example, when we got together with all our Democrat counterparts before we went over to the White House to have a discussion with the president and the vice president, everybody agreed, completely, all 50 states that were there agreed, the border security was the #1 issue. Democrats too. They agreed that the homelessness crisis and the migrant crisis was the #2 issue, and inflation was the next issue. So there's a lot of agreement in terms of what the crises are and what the issues are. How states deal with it and what they're willing to do with their political dynamics in some of those other states are very different. And again, we went in there and we asked our questions, and we don't necessarily get the clearest of answers from the administration. At times, that can be very frustrating as governors, because I think they work with Congress and in that Washington bubble a lot. So as governors, it can be frustrating. We talk a lot about regulations and permitting. As governors, we implement rules and regulations with our Department of Environmental Services or Department of Transportation. The vast majority of issues, rules, and I'll call it the bureaucracy that's clogging this country up, was never passed by Congress, was never signed off by the president. It's a rule or a policy being administered by the EPA or by Department of Labor or whatever it is, because they had, up until recently, really had the power to do that. And so as governors, we see that real clearly, because businesses come to us and go, oh my gosh, I just got this letter from Department of Labor. I'm going to get a penalty for X, Y, and Z, and that's never existed before. Or the EPA just told me I can no longer produce my product. What's going on? Never passed Congress. So governors are kind of on the front lines of a lot of that bureaucratic, I'll call it nonsense, frankly, that clogs up the system. And ultimately, it drives inflation. Right? The #2 issue, #1 on inflation is government prints and spends too much money. That's Economics 101. The #2 issue, the hidden drivers of inflation, are regulations and policies that come without any sort of controls that drive up the cost on just shipping a product from point A to point B, or prevent a power line being developed for 15 to 20 years. So therefore, if you want to build a power line in this country, it costs 10 times more than it should because the risk is now so high on the developers. So it's those, I know that sounds wonky and behind the scenes, but boy, is it crushing middle America right now and driving a lot of the issues. That's why we talk about, let's get back to issues. Let's get back to policies. Let's get back to things that actually impact people, not personal attacks and the blowhardedness you see that I think we're all seeing too much on both sides of the presidential election right now.
We're probably going to get back to some of these issues like energy that's been described, the southern border, but let's go back to some specific issues important in your states and all of the states. And Governor Reeves, I mentioned the description of the Mississippi miracle and your focus on education. I wonder if you could just share a little bit about what you're proud of doing there and what's been accomplished.
Yeah, imagine the fact that I'm sitting there one day and I literally choked on my catfish when the New York Times referred to our education reforms as the Mississippi miracle. The New York Times praising Mississippi, but quite frankly, the numbers are so good they had no other choice. So I came in as our state's lieutenant governor in 2012. In our state, our lieutenant governor is the president of the Senate, appoints committee chairman, assigns all bills to the committee of his or her choice, and assigns all members to the committee of his or her choice. And so it is a very influential position when it comes to public policy. So we worked with our then new Republican governor, our new Republican Speaker of the House, and we enacted numerous education reforms in 2012 and 2013. The single most important one, in my opinion, and we did a lot of them, but the single most important one is we came to the conclusion that the single most important thing in a child's life is learning to read. We believe that from pre-kindergarten to third grade, a kid needs to be learning to read. And after third grade, the kid doesn't need to be learning to read. They need to be reading to learn. And so we instituted a testing mechanism in our state wherein if a kid was not reading at a certain level by the end of the third grade, then they didn't get promoted to the fourth grade. We completely eliminated social promotion. Now, there was a lot of gnashing of teeth from the teachers' unions and others at that time saying we couldn't do that our kids couldn't pass these tests, etc. But, it turns out that if you raise the level of expectations and then you invest in your people, we actually spent $15 million a year hiring reading coaches to not only put in the individual schools to help the individual kids better learn how to read, but also we hired reading coaches to help teach the teachers how to teach reading skills. We went back to the basics. We went to a phonics-based model, and the results have been incredible. 10 years ago, Mississippi's fourth graders, because NAEP tests at the fourth grade level, Mississippi's fourth graders tested 49th best in fourth grade reading. Last year, we were 21st best. Ten years ago, our fourth grade math scores were 50th best in the nation. Last year, they were 23rd best in the nation. And these results aren't just happening for some kids in some school districts. If you look at our African American fourth graders, and in Mississippi, we have 38% of our population is African American. 10 years ago, when compared to their peers, other black fourth graders around the nation, our black fourth graders scored 45th best in the nation. Last year, they scored 5th best in the nation. Our high school graduation rates were 72% 10 years ago. Last year, we graduated 90% of our high school students, better than the national average. Our overall, everybody thinks of Mississippi and says, well, they're last in everything. We went from 50th best in education to 30th best, and you ain't seen nothing yet because we're focused on it. We kept our kids in the classroom during a very difficult time during COVID, and we just measured and got results recently, and our overall results, all of the learning loss that we saw in virtually every state, some a lot more than others, we've actually made up over 100% of that learning loss, and our kids now are doing better than our kids were in 2020 prior to COVID. And so all of this is important, obviously, for a lot of different reasons, certainly for every one of those kids. But most importantly, today, if you look at testing results, Mississippi has the smartest fourth graders in the southeastern United States. That means in 10 years, what? We're going to have the smartest workforce in the southeastern United States, and people are seeing it and investing in our state because of it.
Well, bravo. We actually had a New York Times columnist was here at the Aspen Ideas Festival and touted the same amazing story. Let's stay and Governor Stitt talking about workforce. You have spoken very eloquently about bringing your work to the world, the work of the world or something like that, to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma to the world. Tell us a little bit about the relationships you're building with key trading partners and how that is affecting the state's economy. And your background as an entrepreneur naturally led you to recognize the importance of this. You think of Oklahoma in the middle of the country and the rest of the world, it's just not obvious.
Yeah, that catfish comment was pretty funny. I like that. But no, when I ran for governor, I'd never ran for office before, and I was in the private sector and started a company with $1,000 in a computer and grew it. And I just felt like my state was struggling, and I needed to. And so the saying, you kind of butchered it a little bit. I wanted to take Oklahoma to the world and bring the world back to Oklahoma. So we have this international strategy. So I've met with probably 60, 70 different ambassadors. Every time I go to D.C., it's like a trade mission, and we've traveled around the world and really selling companies that if you're looking for a U.S. presence, if you're a European company and you want a U.S. presence, Oklahoma is the right spot to be located for a lot of different things. We can talk about education, but also the thing that every ambassador talks about is energy and a reliable, affordable energy grid. That's what they all are concerned about. And Oklahoma does that better than anybody. We're the #1 most affordable energy to the industrial consumer, to the commercial, #2 to the commercial consumer. And then the second thing they talk about is workforce. And so I appreciate what Governor Reeves was talking about with education. Same thing in Oklahoma. We're focused on education. And a couple of wins that we've done with education, well, and I also want to talk about, real quick, let me just sidetrack for a second. On education, I think too often we pigeonhole kids. You've got to go to college. You've got to go get a 4-year degree. And about 52% of the population across the U.S. will go get a 4-year degree. Well, what do we do with the other 48%? Europe, if you look at Germany and Switzerland and Finland and some of these other countries, they do a better job with apprenticeships, getting these kids into the workforce. So we have a saying in Oklahoma, I want every kid college ready or career ready when they get out of high school. And so we set up, so aviation is a big industry in Oklahoma. We've got Tinker Air Force Base, which is the largest maintenance and repair facility in the world. We keep all of the Air Force fleet flying out of Oklahoma City. So we've got 1,100 aviation companies. American Airlines has their largest maintenance facility in Tulsa with 5,000 employees, and they need aviation mechanics, okay? So an aviation mechanic, American Airlines will tell you, his starting salary is $70,000 a year. I went home and told my son, I said, you're going to become an aviation mechanic because they're all making $100,000 within 5 years. And I asked the C-suite guys, I was talking to the CEO and all of them, and I said, how many of y'all started as an A&P mechanic? And about a third of the room raised their hand. So we're making pathways to go get your bachelor's and your master's and move on up. So we set up a special high school in Norman, Oklahoma, where I went to school. And it's an aviation school. And so when you're a freshman in high school, if you want to become a pilot or if you want to become an aviation mechanic, you can start going to this special school. So that's what we mean by workforce, is aligning the workforce with the jobs of tomorrow and getting the career tech and those folks aligned with it. The last thing I'll say on education is education freedom is important to us as Oklahomans, okay? And what I mean by that is we've got a lot of great schools, but during COVID, we had Tulsa, Oklahoma, was closed down for 355 days. And I hammered them every single day because my kids were in school the whole time. And if you were a governor and you had to talk to the single moms, the single dads that called your office, and they said, Governor, what am I supposed to do? My first grader is not learning how to read on Zoom right now. And it would break your heart. They had to go to work. They didn't have good internet. And their neighbors in private schools, their kids were in school. And so we passed the best school choice bill in the country. So every family now has a $7,500 refundable tax credit to go to any school that they want. And I'm telling you, I tell audience all the time, I said, here's the deal. Rich people already have school choice. They can send their kids wherever they want. I said, if your daughter is getting in a bad relationship or getting into drugs or you've got low ACT scores, you're going to do everything you can to move your kids. But if you're in a failing school district and you don't have the resources to move, and that's just really a trapped feeling for a lot of parents. And so we opened that up in Oklahoma. We're so proud of it. We think it's going to have a huge impact.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was actually going to ask you about your leadership on school choice. Governor Sununu, I'm going to come back to something that I asked a little earlier, but ask you to drill even deeper into it. And that is our frustration with government that doesn't work. And I look across this room, many of you may not realize this. He deals with a House of Representatives in New Hampshire, which is the largest in the country by maybe a factor of 2. He has as many representatives as there are seats in this
400.
audience.
400 members in the legislature.
And they earn what?
$100 a year.
$100 a year.
Yeah. And we only have 1.4 million people. So by definition, it's the most representative body of government on the planet.
But then, you've dealt with Democratic majority, if I'm right, Republican majority, pretty tightly split, and you've gotten things done.
Yeah.
Full day kindergarten, expanded school choice, like we just heard about, increased educational funding,
Tax cuts,
many
tax cuts.
So
Yeah,
how do you do it?
So you've seen our license plate? You know that "Live Free or Die" motto? Yeah, we take it serious. It is not just 4 cool words on a license plate. We take it real serious. And my answer is gonna harp on what these guys are talking about. I'll start with this. Government is not here to solve your problems. Government is not here to solve your problems. What we are here to do is create as many doors of opportunity for you, your family, your kids, your business, whatever. I don't know your problem. I don't know, right? There's a million stories of problems I have in my state. These guys have even millions more because they're a little bigger. But we don't know. So what can we do? Some governments say, here's the answer. We're going to funnel all the money into this mental health solution and go through this door and you'll be fine. That's wrong. So what we do is try to, that live free or die spirit, that the individual is way more important than the government. And so what we do is create opportunities. What's Kevin talking about? When we talk about school choices, it's opportunity. We don't know what's best for your kid. And how arrogant for any government to say that this one system is how you need to send your kid and it'll all work out fine. It doesn't. We got some of the best. I think we're ranked top 4 public schools in the country. They are awesome. I grew up through the public schools in New Hampshire. I'm so proud of them. But they're not for every kid, and that's cool. Some homeschool, charter school, private school, parochial school. I don't care. Why should I tell you what's best for your kid or your business? So what we do is we set up the doors. Now extrapolate that to mental health. I was talking with some folks about this before. One of the major problems in this country is when you talk about the mental health crisis, which I think is the crisis in the country, the opioid crisis, which is absolutely attached to the mental health crisis. So many states will say, well, we have a problem, so we're going to put more money into it. But if the system isn't designed right, when you do that, all you're doing is pushing harder in the wrong direction. You have to have the courage to decentralize your system. I have folks in rural New Hampshire. These guys have a lot of rural parts of their states. We make sure that mental health services are available there. No single mom dealing with an opioid crisis, that can be kind of a functional addict, is going to potentially drive 200 miles to a treatment center? Are you kidding? That's not going to happen. She's not driving into the inner city for that. So you go there. That's our responsibility. We make sure the treatment is in your backyard, because otherwise she could lose her job, lose her family, lose everything. They're not going to do it. They'll tough it out. When there's a crisis with your kids at 2 a.m., I don't know what the crisis is. I don't know where you are, but I shouldn't be asking you to drive to a major city because that's where all the nonprofits are. No way. So we made it simple. If you want a nonprofit and providing services, we're going to give you the grants, but you got to set up satellite places all across our state. We need to be where you are, and that's the opportunity we're trying to create. And Democrats don't always agree with this, especially in the school. I mean, again, I don't mind telling you, I'm a pretty moderate guy. I think the Teachers Union of America is an absolute freaking disaster. An absolute disaster. And they showed their true colors in COVID, right? They showed their true colors in COVID. They can't walk back those statements. They did everything they could to shut down those schools because they thought it was in the best interest of the teachers. Teachers were begging for those schools to be open. And that's where red states and blue states really, I think, separated themselves because we said, what is best for these kids, right? So it's all about just creating opportunity and appreciating that we're very into, because we have this accessible government, right? 400 members. I mean, everybody has their rep's cell phone number. Everybody has my cell phone number. It's on the internet. It is. I've had the same one phone number for 20 years. I've lived in the same house. I don't even live in a governor's mansion. I get people that come, it's weird, but people will literally come up and knock on my door and ask for services, and it's like, whoa. So one of the, I can handle it. My kids will not so much. There is an unwritten rule in New Hampshire, right? My security's like, oh my God, yeah, this is horrible. We will give you complete accessibility to us, to government, to what your problem is, to constituent service, as long as you respect our privacy, and usually it works out pretty well. COVID, it got a little crazy, and usually it works out pretty well. But that accessibility is really, I think, one of our secret sauces. I have cities and towns all across New Hampshire. I might hate what they do with schools and certain policies and all that, but I believe in local control. I believe in a free market, even in government. I believe that when your local government makes bad decisions, you as the voter, as the parent, as the business owner in that community, will see the bad decision and vote them out and make a better decision. And you know what is best for your community better than me sitting in Concord, even though I might disagree. So I don't do teacher contracts in New Hampshire. Every town does them separately. We don't have sales tax. We don't have income tax. We don't have interest and dividends tax. So all of you that live in Aspen can rethink your life choices. By the way, I love that you guys got $185 million. That is amazing. That is so amazing. You got $185 million. You are going to get a great two-bedroom condo in downtown Aspen for that.
I think there could be a lot of people here who are thinking about moving from the Rocky Mountains to the Green Mountains. So no, but I'm glad you also mentioned and again, this summer we've had a lot of presentations here about the mental health crisis, and I do want to give you credit. You were recognized as one of the leaders in this, and also, with the opioid crisis in 2015, New Hampshire was particularly hard.
We were the worst. We were the worst state in the country. We were the second worst in overdose deaths. And I did three things. I created what I called the doorway, which said no one has to drive more than 40 miles to get treatment, recovery, prevention, all the different types of services. And it costs more money to do that, but the recidivism back into the system, the folks that got re-addicted, if you will, went way, way down. So we created a much more efficient system in the long run. Sorry, I don't want to go.
Oh, no, that's glad. And you mentioned the famous license plate, too. I think I'm right, live free or die, which never could quite understand. But I think the Cato Institute somehow, I don't know how they did this, ranked New Hampshire as having the greatest individual freedoms of any state in the country.
Most individual freedoms, most economic freedoms, and I may have been the most fiscally responsible governor in the country. But I don't like to brag about that.
Okay, all right. So
again, we try to be super efficient because it's more about you as an individual than us as government solving the problem.
Let's return more to the private sector and what states can do to encourage a vigorous private sector to provide as much opportunity as possible. And Governor Reeves, you have brought billions of private sector investment, including the largest, as I referred to I think the largest in your state history. Tell us how you did that and how that's playing out.
Well, my predecessor, who's a good friend of mine and a good guy, worked very hard at economic development and announced $7.2 billion in new economic development projects over 8 years. We announced over $12 billion in January of this year, and there's a combination of things. Clearly, the education reforms that we've enacted and the positive education results that we're seeing is a big reason why. When you think about economic development and economic growth and particularly large institutions, the reality is in America, and particularly in Mississippi, the vast majority of our employees are employed by small business owners. And we do everything we can to get out of their way and give them the opportunity to grow. But in terms of new economic development projects, large capital investments, there's a couple things that you have to do. You have to focus on workforce development and job training, because you've got to have a workforce that can help those individual entities that deliver their product to market. The second thing you have to do is you have to have sites that are available for them. If they're going to build a $3.5 billion investment, they got to have somewhere to do it. And speed to market really freaking matters. If you tell them, yeah, we can get you a site ready in the next 2 or 3 years, they're like, thanks, but no thanks, I'm going somewhere. And reality is, large greenfield sites, there's a shortage of them in America. There's a shortage of them in Mississippi. But when we came in, we said we're going to identify 30 sites across the state of different sizes. We're going to invest in them to deliver infrastructure, because after all, one of the core functions of government is infrastructure, right? So we're going to deliver infrastructure to those sites: water, sewer, roads, bridges, power lines, etc. So we now have 30 sites that we're turning over in new announcements every day. And we also have a situation in our state in which COVID, of all of the challenges that it brought, we showed during COVID that our people get up and they go to work and they value a hard day's work for a good day's pay. And that wasn't true in every state across America. We never shut private industry down for any extended period of time. And our people showed up and went to work during COVID. And there are a lot of CEOs of medium-sized companies, large companies, that saw that and said, hey, we want people like that working for us. And so, by the way, none of that is complicated. This is not really, you don't have to be a strategic genius to figure this out. It's about doing the blocking and tackling. And to your point, earlier regarding the trust in government and the role of government. You know, a lot of folks that are in government like to say, well, we're going to spend more money on X, and we're going to throw money at it so we can go in the cocktail party next door and pat ourselves on the back, and all our friends can tell us what a good job is doing. It's easy to throw more money at something. The hard part, whether it's mental health or workforce development, as these two guys have talked about, is actually getting in and actually doing the work. And what you see, certainly from most Republican governors around the country, is they're actually doing the work, and they're actually doing the things that matter, that are moving the needle for our constituents, and our constituents see it.
Can I add one thing there? I think Tate brings up a great point. When as a governor, when Tate gets in and he gets his hands dirty and he's busting his butt for a whole new system, and people see him doing the work, guess what happens? Everybody else wants to join, and they do the work, right? The teamwork effort that comes from that is just amazing. We're not, I mean, maybe these guys are. I'm not solving the world's problem. Like, I'm just trying to lead with a great example that inspires others to get on board, know that everyone's ideas are heard. We can't do everything everybody wants. But, boy, when you lead by that hard work example, they come out of the woodwork, not to say, pat you on the back, to dig in themselves. And they do the work. And now you have this huge army behind you that's leading the efforts in their communities with their passions and their advocacy for whatever the issue of the day might be. It's pretty awesome to see.
I tell my people all the time, legislators, Republicans and Democrats, because they both come to me and say, we want a project like that in our district. And the reality is that success in economic development, success begets success. And we have a lot of momentum in Mississippi right now, and the reason for that is everybody's buying in to the strategy that we're selling.
Governor Stitt, you mentioned earlier, which I think would be a surprise to many people, Oklahoma's thought of as an oil and gas state, but your leadership in renewables as well. Just talk to us a little bit about how you've played to that and the opportunity you see for the state.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I've talked a lot about energy and how important that is to everything. I mean, inflation, everything gets, all your goods and products get delivered. So energy is a driver on inflation, not only the deficit spending that we're seeing in Washington, D.C., but a lot of it has to do with, and Sununu talked about that, was some of the regulation that goes in. I think it's about $1.7 trillion in hidden costs to the American people for those over-regulations. But renewables, all of the above approach is what we talk about in Oklahoma. But the other thing that we're leaning heavily into is critical minerals. And no matter where you're at, if you think about the supply chain, and we saw that kind of get exposed through the COVID pandemic and the reliance on China, and 70% of our critical minerals come from China. The processing comes from China. So we've started leaning in. I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about we need a supply in the U.S. like we have in oil and gas for critical minerals. We need to set up some kind of structure where we allow public-private partnerships to go build and maintain relationships, whether it's the mines around the world, to make sure we can meet the needs of Americans. So we have the first ever mineral to magnet manufacturer now in the Western Hemisphere in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Those magnets go into everything from your jet fighters to your cell phones. So we're leaning heavily into critical minerals as well, but hydrogen. We already talked about wind, solar. We believe you need more of everything, but you have to have an honest conversation about the base load. And if y'all remember back in 2021, we had that huge polar vortex. Remember that? It was just unseasonably cold throughout the Midwest. And Texas had, a couple days of blackouts, and the grids were really taxed. I just want to give you a quick story. So normally 40% of our energy in Oklahoma comes from wind, okay? 40% is natural gas, and then just a little bit, we got a little bit of coal, a little bit of some other stuff. Okay, but the wind turbines were frozen, okay? So they were frozen. So that goes to zero, all right? And even the gas coming out of the wellheads, it was frozen. We were having a hard time getting that to our generation plants. And so if we didn't have the ability to flip to coal in Oklahoma, we went to 50% coal during that 2-week period. And I tell young people, if we didn't have coal in Oklahoma, you couldn't have watched TikTok for 2 solid weeks. And they're like, what? What do you mean, Governor? And I'm like, well, it's important that you understand when you plug your Tesla in or your cell phone, where does that come from? And we have to educate people that you need more of everything. And you talk about data centers and AI and those super scalers and all the stuff that you guys are probably looking to invest in. And we need more energy in the U.S., and that comes from everything.
Okay, I'm going to just ask one more question, then get everyone ready for questions that you'd like for these 3 remarkable governors. But Governor Sununu, I have to ask you, I think it was just 2 weeks ago, you wrote an op-ed in Governor Reeves' favorite newspaper, the New York Times. And in it, you called on your fellow Republicans, including Donald Trump, to stop personal attacks and focus on policy. You said, my fellow Republicans, stop the trash talk. Do you think that's possible?
Well, yeah, look, and again, I care about the Republicans. I want to win. So I think the Democrats are doing it, and I think the more they do it, the more they're going to screw it up. When it comes to, I believe, when it comes to issues, successes, red state versus blue state, Republican, more conservative, you can call them more conservative policies, but Republican policies win. We have the policies that have more opportunity to lower inflation. We have the policies that actually can handle the border crisis. These are the top issues that Americans want to be dealt with, right? And we can go all the way down the list. As soon as you don't talk about that, why would you do that? Why would you not talk about things that win the election? And look, I think most people know, Donald Trump and I didn't get his Christmas card this year. Let's just say that, right? So we're not seeing eye to eye, but you're darn right I'm going to vote for him. I don't like the chaos. I don't like the blusteriness. I don't like the character issues. Those are all very real to me. But at the end of the day, government has to be about results. And I believe our side can win on the results. And I would say this, and I'll probably say this on CNN sometime later next week, I think this election should be an absolute layup for Republicans. I think if the Republican nominee for president should win by 10 points in every state if he in particular would just focus on issues. If everyone could focus on that, it would be a layup. So my argument to Donald Trump is, man, if you don't win this one, this is on you now, because everybody agrees. Not just politicians. I think everyone agrees. If the Republicans focus on issues, he would win this thing. But he has a hard time there. So again, I'm not going to preach to the Democrats. They have their own problems. And it's not just the president, by the way. My message was to Republicans, if you noticed. It's everybody. Don't engage in it because we have so much going for us on our side. Don't let them distract us from the winning issues in November.
Okay, Governor Stitt, Governor Reeves, thank you. Just quick comments about what you just heard and how you and your brethren and there are women in your group.
Did you get a Christmas card this year?
But and then we'll open it to the audience.
So I agree with what Governor Sununu said, and we have an initiative in Oklahoma, and it's really led by Governor Cox, who is the chairman of the National Governor Association out of Utah, and it's called Disagree Better. And people are tired of the fighting and the name calling. Let's have an honest discussion. Like we've told you our policy positions. You can argue with us. You may not agree with us. You may agree with part of it. But that's the democratic process, right? And so let's start talking about these ideas and let's disagree better. So tomorrow in Oklahoma, Tim Shriver will be in Oklahoma. So tomorrow night, I'm having a Disagree Better Summit. So I'll be on stage with a Democrat senator from Oklahoma. We'll have Tim Shriver there. So we're basically trying to model to the next generation and to Oklahomans and to Americans about how we should have civil discourse. And I think you see the three of us up here want to talk about policies, and Sununu's right. If President Trump would talk about the policies, we do think that we know how to. Free market principles are what works. If you think the Democrat policies of more regulation, more government, that actually harms the middle class. All right, the big companies are ones that can handle more regulation. We need to encourage entrepreneurships. I started with $1,000 in a computer. We want those small businesses started in America, and that's free market principles.
Governor
I'm going to
Stitt.
be very brief. Just so y'all know, I got my Christmas card and Sununu's Christmas card delivered to me. But we agree on this issue. Every day when a Mississippian or an American goes to the grocery store and buys milk and bread, that is a direct, the fact that they're paying 25, 30, 35% more for essential products is a direct result of the policies enacted and championed by the Biden-Harris administration. Today in Mississippi, we announced the arrest of an individual. It was an illegal alien that had raped a 10-year-old boy multiple times. That individual was in our country as a direct result of policy decisions made by Biden and Harris. Period. That's what we ought to talk about. And if that's what we're talking about for the next 75 days, we are going to win this election.
Well,
I believe it.
we don't have 75 days, but we do have about 10 minutes. So I think we have mic runners, and I see there's a question right here in the second row over here. And if the runners could be looking for people, so it's rather hard for me to see. And then Ken Edelman will have the second question. Please.
Okay. Well, thank you for your honesty, and appreciate the discussion. I direct this to the governor from Oklahoma, but the rest of you can jump in. The senator from your state, Senator Langford, was involved in a bipartisan effort to develop an immigration proposal, which the Republicans ultimately rejected, despite the fact that it was strongly supported by a large number of people in the country and also authored by Senator Langford. I'd be interested in your comments as to why the Republicans, who appear to be so interested in dealing with the immigration problem, wouldn't pass a bill which seemed to deal with that.
Well, first off, I'm not in the U.S. Senate. I don't know exactly what the bills did, but yeah, I don't.
Okay.
Do what?
Let's just listen to the answer.
Yeah. So don't know exactly what the bill did, but from the outside looking in, it looked like this was a political issue that they wanted to be part of the November issue, and so maybe one side did not want to solve that problem, and we think that's terrible. So I mean, that's basically what it looked like from the outside looking in, is that the Republicans in the Senate turned on that issue because it got political, and they wanted it to be a November election issue, is what it looked like to us and most Americans. So is that honest enough for you? So that's what it looked like happened. But again, I always tell people, you have to have border security. We all agree in this room. All right, we got to have strong borders. And the immigration policy, we have to fix our immigration policy. We need to make sure it doesn't take 10 years to come here to chase the American dream, to meet the employer's needs, and to meet someone's needs that want to come in to actually be a part of the American dream.
Governor Sununu, you wanted to
I'll
talk
add a little
about...
bit. Only I want to add something in because this was the hot topic at NGA, right? The National Governors Association meeting. So understand that we had about 500,000 people coming in a year in 2020. As soon as Biden came in, it jumped to about 2.5 million, simply because of policies and the 16 executive orders he signed in his first 100 days. So that could have all been undone. And when we all got together as Republican and Democrat governors, we said to the president, would you, in fact, I'm not sure which governor asked the question, would you just undo some of those policies you did? We don't need the legislation. This was policy driven, right? And he said, no, the lawyers say I can't. And I went, that's crazy. And Ali Mayorkas, I'm very friendly with Ali. Most Republicans aren't, but I'm very friendly with him. And I said, what's going on here? And he said, politics is involved. Now, understand that bill you're referencing, it still would have let nearly 1.5 million people in a year. It let in a certain number per day. It didn't solve the problem. That was still more than twice the problem. So I think what the issue that a lot of, and again, I don't want to speak for Republicans in Congress and Senate, because frankly, I think you should just fire everyone in Washington and be better. But that being said, I think they said, look, this doesn't really get us back to where we were. This doesn't undo the policies. The Remain in Mexico policy, that was a big partnership policy with Mexico that we wanted to see. So when you went to the border, you said, I'm seeking asylum. They said, okay, you're on the list, but you got to wait in Mexico till we adjudicate whether you have asylum. The fundamental change Biden had is, you're on the list and go, we'll see you in 4 years. Have at it in America. You know, and we're never going to see them again in court. It didn't fix that. So the two issues were a lot of people are still coming in, didn't reinstill the partnership with Mexico to keep them over there, and it didn't address the real fundamental problem, which was a policy-driven issue. I'm not saying it wasn't worthwhile addressing. There was probably some other good stuff in there, but I'm just telling you, I think that's where a lot of the hesitation was. Don't let Biden off the hook for creating this problem in the first place, because it's his policies that he could very well undo, which, by the way, guess what happened 3 months later? He started to undo. Right? And we've gotten better numbers. Still not good, but at least it's better.
And I just want to say one thing, just a small reminder to everyone in the room. There was not one law passed by the United States Congress, signed by the president, that affected immigration policy from December 31 of 2020 until today. The drastic change in the number of illegals coming into our country was a direct result of the executive orders that Joe Biden signed. If he wanted to reduce the amount of immigrants coming into our country, all he had to do is undo them. All he had to do is undo what he did his first few days in office, period. It's a fact.
Ken, you have a question?
Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. This is a wonderful discussion. Ken Edelman, I was 7 years in the Reagan administration, and Governor Sununu, I knew your dad pretty well.
You need better friends.
Yeah, and really admired him and really liked him. My question is directed to you. We know you for the last year because you were telling us that Donald Trump was an enemy of democracy. He was a threat to our country.
I never said he was an enemy of democracy or a threat to the country. Be careful.
Okay.
I didn't like him.
You were very
chaotic.
extreme in your language.
Yeah.
And you were very persistent. You had interview after interview. You had city after city. You said it was going to be, that you didn't like the lying. You didn't like the abuse.
I don't like the January 6th stuff, the election
The
denial.
January
awful.
6th you were great on. And, saying there really was an insurrection there, almost of our government, being overthrown. You were just very clear and very persistent for a very long time. Then President Trump gets indicted and convicted of 35 felonies, and then you endorse him and say you're going to vote for him. People like me say, my God, I loved him. I loved his father. What has happened to this? How do you explain that?
Very easily. So be clear. I don't take back a single thing I've ever said. I've never said he's a threat to democracy, because those are not appropriate words for either side, by the way. That's a dog whistle for everybody. I don't like him as a person. I think he's bombastic. I think there's major character issues there. And if you, as an individual, put that as your top priority and that's why you're not going to vote for him, or you think January 6th was a disqualifier, I don't judge you for that. That's your choice. But I'll speak in terms of Joe Smith walking down the street in Detroit, whose family cannot pay their bills because of inflation, who was told Biden economics was helping them, but their family was getting crushed, who can't find a home, whose city is completely overrun with migrants, who can't get mental health services because the federal government prioritizes non-citizens over him and his family. I side with him that just wants a change, that says this is an administration, and what you get, don't forget, it's not just Trump that you're voting for. What I'm excited for is a Republican administration running the EPA, running DOT, running all of these different agencies that have so much impact in our lives, agriculture and all of that, that fundamentally believe you're more important than they are, that your city, your town, your state should have more power than the federal government. So when I vote for Trump, I'm voting for a Republican administration that drastically agrees with my ideals. I will take all the bad. You won't, and that's fine. What I don't like is when people demonize. And to be fair, I got behind a candidate. These guys got behind their own candidates. I wanted Nikki to win. I was fighting hard. I think Nikki would be up by 30 points today if she was the nominee. But unlike the Democrats, as Republicans, what I insisted on and what I fought so hard with Nikki and others is we're going to go through a primary. If Trump's going to win this thing, he's going to earn it. And to his credit, he did. He won 27 states, while having a viable challenger. He earned it. And we said, okay, this is the nominee. And we're going to get a Republican administration out of here. I will take all of his badness because I believe government has to be about results and change. And so, again, I don't take back a single word I've ever said about him. But knowing what we have today and where it would go, I mean, Joe Biden was the moderate guy, guys. He was the most moderate of the Democrats that ran. Kamala was the most liberal. That's why she came in last place in 2020. She got 129 votes in New Hampshire. It's the only vote she's ever received, right? But now she's the nominee, and she's going to pick Tim, who I openly said I like Tim. He's a nice guy. But holy cow, is he progressive. He sat around and watched his cities burn. He sat around and watched that craziness happen. That is not leadership, guys. I'll take a little chaos with a great administration over that kind of nonsense we've been dealing with.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we could obviously continue talking all evening. There's a discrepancy between this clock and my watch, but these three gentlemen need to get back to their conference to continue their dialogue with their colleagues. Let me thank them very much.
Thank you, guys.
So much.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.